Now, sir, your fears of being burned or buried alive are, I presume, as groundless as your dread of the planets being plucked from their orbits. Nay, they are more groundless. From the fewness of their numbers, it is not very likely that Covenanters will attempt to overturn the state, and as they do not stand on a very respectable footing with His Majesty's government, there is little government of the king joining them in their diabolical scheme of burning the people or burying them alive. But with regard to the plucking of the planets from their orbits, the case is very different. To qualify for this, according to your own doctrine, all that is necessary is that Covenanters be great astronomers. Now, who can tell but some time or other this may actually be the case? I can assure you, sir, it is whispered, nay, it is confidently affirmed by some, and they appeal to the records of Glasgow College for the truth of their statement, that for more than 20 years past the Covenanting students, in proportion to their number, have taken more prizes, particularly in the higher philosophical classes at that university, than the students of any other denomination in the United Empire. It is even reported that the gentleman who in philosophical studies has lately eclipsed all his fellow students, and who at this very moment is in possession of a large burse, is an Irish Covenanter. Now, sir, I must confess that according to your doctrine, there is something in these appearances truly alarming. Should Covenanting students go on in this way, eclipsing their fellow students, it is hard to say, but some of them may at last become great astronomers, and in case of this event, I would not guarantee the safety of the solar system. What mischief might enter the minds of such aspiring, headstrong fellows, it is difficult to say. Should they actually pluck any of the planets from their orbit, for aught I know not, the consequences might be universally pernicious. Not only would these planets, according to your doctrine, appear deformed, but as you are a great astronomer, you know much better than I do that these planets are peopled as well as our own, and of course, should those desperadoes drag them a nearer conjunction with the sun, their miserable inhabitants, though not buried alive, might be burned alive. On the other hand, should those miscreants sweep the planets to a greater distance, the conqueror of the French, General Frost, might without the least mercy overwhelm in one universal catastrophe their entire population. Now, my dear sir, being a very humane gentleman, your benevolence being not at all confined to this dirty little world, but embracing in its extensive grasp the inhabitants of distant stars and planets, I have no doubt that you will memorize the faculty not to permit any Covenanter to enter the higher philosophical classes in Glasgow College till he has previously given sufficient security that he will not, on any account whatever, either pluck or assist in plucking from their orbits any of the planets of the solar system, allowing you time to draw up your memorial, and in the meanwhile, warmly participating in your benevolent concern for the safety of the planets. I am, etc. Letter 10. Reverend Sir, to convince the world that the principles of Covenanters are intolerant, you quote the following paragraph from their Act and Testimony. Quote, and further they declare that it is most wicked, and what manifestly strikes against the sovereign authority of God, for any power on earth to pretend to tolerate, and by sanction of civil law to give license to men to publish and propagate with impunity whatever errors, heresies, and damnable doctrines Satan and their own corrupt and blinded understandings may prompt them to believe and embrace. Authoritative toleration being destructive of all true religion, and of that liberty wherewith Christ hath made his people free, and of the great end thereof, which is, that being delivered out of the hands of our enemies, we may serve the Lord, etc. Unquote. Now, sir, you will certainly grant that the Presbytery who published the above document are the best qualified to explain it. In an abstract of their principles, designed as an introduction to their Act and Testimony, they express themselves thus, quote, while dissenters testify against toleration, they are not to be understood as meaning a merely passive toleration, implying nothing more than simply permitting men to exist unmolested, to hold their different opinions without using external violence to make them change these, or to exterminate them from the face of the earth if they do not. Forbearance of this kind, after every scriptural and rational means has been used without effect, cannot be condemned. But what they have in view is that authoritative toleration in which the rulers of a kingdom, assuming the character of judges in these matters, by their proclamations or other public deeds, declare what different opinions or systems they will allow to be taught and propagated, and to what modes of worship they will give countenance and protection, while they exclude others from that supposed privilege. Unquote. Such are the principles Covenanters have published to the world. Be candid, sir, and tell your readers that it is only against authoritative toleration that Covenanters testify. Passive toleration they have declared in their public deeds they by no means condemn. They approve of no weapons for converting men, but the Bible, the preaching of the gospel, arguments, prayers, and the like. That toleration against which they testify, even in the paragraph you have quoted, is expressly styled authoritative toleration. Viewed in this light, the texts deduced in proof of the doctrine, are perfectly appropriate. They read thus, quote, "There is one lawgiver who is able to save and to destroy. Who art thou that judgest another? Who art thou that judgest another man's servant? To his own master he standeth or falleth." But Peter and John answered and said, "Whether it be right in the sight of God to hearken unto God more than unto thou, judge ye. And now, Lord, behold their threatenings, and grant unto thy servants that with all boldness they may speak thy word. Ye are bought with a price, be ye not the servants of men. And call no man your father upon the earth, for one is your Father who is in heaven," etc. By way of innuendo, I tell you that these texts are worthy of observation. And then you go on to observe, quote, "If these texts mean anything, it is that no magistrate or man or body of men has a right to prevent their fellow creatures from believing whatever doctrines their understandings may prompt them to believe and embrace," unquote. Pray, sir, did the Reformed Presbytery teach in the passage you have quoted, or have they taught in any other part of their writings, that any magistrate has a right to prevent men from believing according to the dictates of their understandings? No, sir. Neither the Reformed Presbytery nor any other presbytery have taught as you ridiculously insinuate. They have taught no such absurdities. No Spanish inquisitor can prevent a man from believing according to the dictates of his understanding. He might as well attempt to prevent him from seeing colors or hearing sounds according to the dictates of his senses. Not to believe the doctrines which our understanding prompts us to believe is a contradiction. It is to believe and not to believe those doctrines at the same time. Now, sir, were the texts quoted above written for the purpose of proving that no man has a right to do that which is impossible, that which implies a contradiction, a new and admirable commentary indeed. The texts, my dear sir, were quoted against authoritative toleration. They were quoted to prove that no man or magistrate has a right to assume the character of a judge in matters of religion, that he has no right to license men to publish and propagate whatever doctrines he thinks proper, and to prohibit by law the publication of others. The doctrines which are tolerated are either the true and genuine doctrines of the Bible, or they are not. If they are not the doctrines of the Bible, for any mortal man to give them the sanction of his authority is downright rebellion against the king and head of the church. To sanction by civil law what is contrary to the divine law is nothing less than treason against the King of Heaven. What would be thought of the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland were he to issue proclamations tolerating us to obey laws directly contrary to the laws of the land? On the other hand, if the doctrines tolerated are the true and genuine doctrines of the Bible, they require no toleration, they disdain it. To pretend to tolerate such doctrines is to insult the majesty of heaven. How impious for any monarch who is but a worm of the dust to say to the subjects of King Jesus, quote, "I tolerate you to obey your master," unquote. Does not such language imply that he has a right to prohibit their obedience if he pleases, and that his authority is paramount to that of the blessed Redeemer? What would be the thought of the President of the United States if, coming over to Ireland, he were to issue proclamations tolerating us to believe the laws of our country? Such, my dear sir, is the legal toleration of which you appear to be so great an admirer, and against which Covenanters esteem it their duty to testify. Now every person must at once see that it is not the enemies of legal toleration, but its friends, that plead for the interference of the civil magistrate in matters of religion. They must see that Covenanters, in testifying against legal toleration, are testifying against the interference of the civil magistrate, and that the Reverend Presbyterian, by approving of legal toleration, approves at the same time of magistrical interference. You tell us that our forefathers, like Jesus and his apostles, could have struggled for toleration. Pray, in what instance did our blessed Redeemer and his apostles struggle for a legal toleration. It would border too nearly on blasphemy to suppose it. Did the Redeemer struggle to obtain a legal toleration from Herod? How different his conduct. Quote, "Go ye and tell that fox, behold, I cast out devils and do curses today and tomorrow, and the third day I shall be perfected." Unquote. It is true indeed that in your dialogue you declaim very much against the interference of the magistrates in matters of religion. I confess, however, that I find it very difficult to give you credit for the sincerity of your declamation. I am sure it would require more ingenuity than I can boast of to reconcile your professions and your practice. We have just now seen that you contradict those professions by approving of authoritative toleration. In a variety of other particulars, the inconsistency of your conduct is still more glaring. For instance, why do you allow the civil magistrate to dictate you in the appointment of days of public fasting and thanksgiving? Is this to disclaim magistrical interference? Is this to, quote, "call no man master," unquote? Is this to act in agreeableness to the divine prohibition, quote, "be not ye the servants of men," unquote? Again, why do you allow the civil magistrate to dictate to you in the manner of swearing? Swearing is one of the most solemn acts of worship. To direct us in the manner of its performance, we have the example of God himself, of his saints, and of his Son. Our blessed Redeemer, quote, "lifted up his hand to heaven, and sware by him that liveth for ever and ever, that there should be time no longer," unquote. Book swearing has its foundation neither in scripture, precept, nor example. It can only be traced to heathenish idolatry. No matter, it is enjoined by the civil magistrate, and with you it appears that his authority for the manner of performing the solemn act of worship is perfectly sufficient.